Welcome to the Moved to Meditate podcast. I'm your host, Addie D. Hilster. If you're a yoga practitioner or teacher who knows that there's more to yoga than poses, but you're wondering where to find that, come join our quiet little party. Here you'll find resources to help you deepen your practice, as well as insightful conversations with yoga, movement, and meditation teachers from a range of traditions. On this podcast, we spotlight the more contemplative aspects of movement practice. So we talk about all things gentle yoga, meditation, yin, restorative, yoga therapy, mindfulness, and more. Listen in and connect to a community of like-minded practitioners. Hi everyone, Addie here. Before we officially start today's episode, I just wanted to pop in really quick because when this is coming out, it's about a week before the Thanksgiving holiday in the US. So I thought it was a good time to say thank you and express my gratitude to all of you who have been listening. If you celebrate Thanksgiving, happy Thanksgiving. If not, I'm still grateful. Thank you for being here and for participating in this quiet yoga, meditation, mindfulness community. So we will be off next week for the Thanksgiving holiday, taking a break from episodes for 1 week, but then we'll be back with something interesting very soon. So thank you again for your being here. And if there's a way I can support your practice, or if you have an idea for a future podcast episode, please feel free to reach out to me at mail@movedtomeditate.com or visit my website at movedtomeditate.yoga. Okay, thanks again and enjoy. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast, and thank you for being here. Today, I'm really excited to be speaking with Shauna Fallihee, who I have been connecting with on Instagram for probably a couple of years. And this is the first time we've had the chance to really sit down and chat. We have a lot in common with music background and mindfulness and yoga. So I'm really excited to jump into this conversation. We're going to focus a lot on self-massage and myofascial release, which is one of Shauna's specialties. But I want to bring her in to tell you about herself in a moment. But I'm just going to give you a couple notes from her bio so she doesn't have to kind of give us that resume herself. So Shauna, classical soprano and voice teacher, Shauna Fallihee, loves to teach all the things. I love that in your bio. Shauna has the pleasure of serving on numerous San Francisco Bay Area college and high school voice faculties, leading workshops for choruses and colleges, and maintaining a large private voice studio. Her own wellness journey led her to become an instructor and teacher trainer of the Daily Method, which is an alignment-focused bar and indoor cycling system. And she's also a triathlete and a 2-time marathoner. Very impressive.
It's been a minute.
And in addition to her bachelor's of music in vocal performance and master's in vocal pedagogy, Shauna holds certifications in yoga, RYT 500, myofascial release. She's a certified role model method practitioner, and she studies meditation in the Theravada Buddhist tradition. She has synthesized these modalities with traditional voice teaching in her own program, which is called the Embodied Singer. That's her Instagram handle as well, Embodied Singer. And it's available in the form of the Embodied Online. So that like a virtual studio, Shauna?
Yeah, it's a whole bunch of videos and
so it's like you've got videos on voice, movement, myofascial release, meditation, breath practices.
Yeah, all the things.
That's awesome. Yeah. You're bringing together a lot of beautiful beautiful modalities there to support this art form of singing your instrument.
Yeah.
So, what else do you want to tell us about who you are and what you do in your life as a musician and a yogi and a human
Oh,
being?
yay. It's so fun well, first of all, it's so fun to connect, and I'm so honored to get to talk with you today and get to share our experiences with everybody who's listening, and hopefully they find things that resonate for them too. And it's fun to like hear, your bio in here, sort of like this little encapsulation of your life expressed out. So yeah, those are like the broad strokes of my life. But I think what is interesting to people as they get to know me through my teaching is that I had like no connection to my body at all for the first big part of my life. So I always say like choir was my sport. I was a musician from a very, very young age. When I found out there was such a thing as music school that you could go to, I wrote to Juilliard. I was like 8 years old and got Juilliard admissions paraphernalia and had
Oh
it on
my
the walls.
God.
Like, yeah, I was like bound and determined to be a professional musician. And I am happy to say, but my career, my life has unfolded in ways that I never, ever, ever would have expected. So I didn't have any kind of movement practice, no like meditation, nothing like that. Even all through, through graduate school, through undergraduate, and through my early professional career as a singer and voice teacher. And it was about 10 years ago that I decided it was time to do something, to find some way to move around, to connect to my body that didn't completely freak me out and make me want to quit in shame and fear. And so that was how I started taking the daily method. And I basically like Googled like exercise studio in Oakland. I live in the Bay Area. And I found the daily method on Yelp, and it had like all 5-star reviews, and it was nearby. And I thought, okay, well, I'm going to try this. So I went and took a bar class. I took it from our owner, Susan, who's now is a really good friend of mine. At the time, I was completely petrified, and it was really difficult. And I tell this story a lot. I had a moment there's a mirrored wall in the studio, of seeing myself reflected back, and I was, red-faced and shaking and struggling. And it was really this moment of realization of how I had lived in my body and related to my body and mistreated my body for the first like really big part of my life. And ordinarily, something that made me feel so uncomfortable, I would have just left and never come back. But I thanked Susan, and I sat in my car and I cried for like a half an hour. And then I went back the next day, which was really out of character for me. But there was something that I was like, okay, I think there's something here. And I went back, and that really was the beginning of a trajectory of connecting to my body, loving movement, loving sharing movement modalities, and then realizing how beneficial it was to me as a singer and how beneficial it might be to the singers that I have the privilege of working with. And so it all kind of expanded from there. But that's the origin story of how these things started to knit together for me, connecting to my own body, and then wanting to learn more and share everything that I learned with other people so they could develop a relationship with their body, with their mind, with their instrument, if they were artists or musicians.
That's so interesting. How eventually the paths intertwined for you.
Yes.
I mean, for me, I started yoga because of music school.
Yay.
And I don't know if this is, similar to your trajectory or not, but I was introduced to things like Alexander technique in music school, and my flute teacher did yoga, and I didn't want to do yoga because she did yoga and because she was kind of the boss of me, and I was like, I'm not going to do that. But eventually I hit kind of a wall of being like super stressed out all the time, because music school is like, you're always performing, you're always being judged and critiqued, and you have to practice on top of your academic load, and it's like, it's a lot. And so someone
and if you're
said,
a classical musician, it's a very perfectionistic
oh my
paradigm.
God, yes.
So there's not to interrupt, but I hear you. There's a lot to unpack there.
You totally can relate, right? Like it's very stressful on so many levels, and you're like a 19-year-old or 20-year-old, right?
I went to New England Conservatory of Music when I was 17 years old.
Oh my gosh. And which is famously competitive.
Yeah, it's incredibly competitive. It's graduate school at the undergraduate level, and it's a lot.
Yeah. I mean, so what happened for me was someone was like, dude, you should try yoga. And so I did.
Mhm.
Literally, he said, dude, you should try
Yeah.
yoga. And I actually listened and I did. And so it did nothing but enhance my flute playing,
Hmm.
because to play an instrument or to sing like you do is so, it, my husband always says, like, you're athletes of the small muscles, because you have
Totally.
like this precise bodily control required and breath
Yes.
control to do that. So I'm curious, like, how you found, when you found the daily method and you started to explore these embodiment practices, how that enhanced your singing and or even your ability to like manage stress as a musician.
Oh yeah, D, all of the above. And it's true. I mean, musicians are, uh, we learn to refine coordination of like teeny, teeny, tiny little muscles, most of which we cannot see or even feel, especially for singers. There's all of the musculature inside the larynx, or what people know as like the voice box, right? And so there are all of these very, very, very subtle, refined coordinations happening inside the throat, inside the mouth, with regards to breath mechanics. And all of that requires a level of awareness and the willingness to connect to and feel sensations in your body, which for so many reasons, for so many people may not feel safe. There are a lot of reasons why we might separate our mind from body sensation. But if we're trying to play an instrument, if we're trying to refine our coordination for singing or for other movement practices, it really asks of us that we be connected, that we be embodied, and that we feel what's happening right now, and that we have the emotional and mental capacity to be with what's happening right now, have enough space to then make choices about what we'd like to happen next. So I think any movement modality, it could be yoga, it could be barre, it could be swimming, it could be running, it can be all kinds of different things. Anything that creates a container for you to feel the sensations of your body and manage what's coming up as you experience those sensations is really, really fantastic and translates beautifully to performing arts, to making music, but also just like being a human on this planet, right? Because
Exactly.
that's what it's like to be a person. As things are arising, they're passing away. We have that in common, that language from Buddhist tradition, and it's something that everyone experiences, no matter how they describe it. So for me, the arrival of daily method, which also at the same time I started running, I did the couch to 5K, so did like a little run walk intervals. And then eventually I just fell in love with that. It was very difficult for me, but I loved it. And that again was so new, because in the past, singing was like the thing that I could do from an early age, which is a big
Mhm.
part of why why I followed that trajectory and path, was because it was an area of my life where I felt competent, and felt successful. And I think it's really common for young musicians or actors or dancers to be talented at a young age and just continue doing that thing because it's the thing that everyone is praising you for, that you feel good about yourself for, and hopefully you genuinely love it too, which I did, because that's what sustains you. But at the time that I started running and doing daily method, it was right around the same time I was doing my master's degree in vocal pedagogy. And if you know anything about singing or singing technique, you'll hear a lot of language around, we sing with our whole body, right? So it's not
Mhm.
just from the diaphragm, the deep breathing muscle at the base of the ribs. It's not just from diaphragm up, but the entire body sings. We hear that, but we don't necessarily receive much clear instruction or actionable
Mhm.
instruction about how to integrate the sensation and energy and spaciousness of the entire body into the singing experience. So for me, doing this full body alignment focused exercise, then I was like, oh, this is what it means to feel grounded. This is what it means to feel stable, to feel energized, to create length, to engage. The daily method has a big core conditioning component, a lot of abdominal work. So a lot of the expiratory muscles that we use to move breath were muscles I was actually feeling and using to move my body. So it really enhanced my sensation, my awareness, and my capacity to engage with different parts of the body that then were really, really useful in singing. So I'm so glad that that happened at the same time, so that my experience in my pedagogy program was
Mm.
more holistic. And the teachers I had the privilege of working with were oriented that way already, but didn't have the full depth of knowledge that someone who learns biomechanics and movement practices and
Mm-hmm.
stuff would have. So I was able to kind of, in my mind, make those connections during my master's degree. And I was already
Yeah.
had been teaching voice for a long time at that point too. So I was, working with singers that I had worked with for a long time, where we had a lot of clarity and rapport, and starting to guinea pig and introduce these elements into their lessons. And I was astonished at how it was influencing their singing and my own singing. I'm like,
Yeah,
okay,
it
this is
sounds like
something.
it took things that were conceptual and they, sounded like a good idea, like when the yoga teacher says, breathe into your feet.
Right.
But,
They're
it
like,
gave you like a language for it and a sensation of it and an actual like visceral experience of that. So you could really apply it and make use
yeah.
of it and then pass it along to your students, which I'm sure only reinforced like you like seeing that this is very effective and this
Oh
is very
yeah.
helpful.
Well, teaching teaches you how to teach, right? So every moment that you are teaching, you are actually learning from the people that you're engaging with and
Totally.
refining how you communicate these ideas, how these ideas might vary from body to body, mind to mind, voice to voice. So that refinement process as a teacher is constantly happening as you are aware and present with what's going on for the people you're with.
Absolutely. Same with yoga,
Yeah,
as you know.
absolutely. Yeah.
And, I wanted to bring in the vagus nerve a little bit
Yes. Yay.
because we've mentioned it a little bit on a
Mhm.
previous episode, probably the last one,
Oh, cool.
one of the last ones with Sarit Rogers. We were
Mm.
talking about the nervous system and we kind of name
Yes.
dropped the vagus nerve, but
Mhm.
we didn't really go into what that is. And I think, like, because of your vocal background, there's a little even more to say about the vagus nerve and how we can affect it. So I'd love to ask you to just tell us a little bit about this special nerve and what it does and what
Yes.
role it plays and
Happily. When
yeah.
you learn something and you're like, why isn't everybody talking about this? Why isn't this on the nightly news? Why is this not the cover of Time magazine? Yeah. So the vagus nerve is a cranial nerve. It's the 10th cranial nerve. So it originates in the brainstem. And the name vagus nerve comes from the same root as the word vagabond. So often it's referred to as the wandering nerve. And this is because the vagus nerve is unique in that it doesn't just go from the brainstem to one place, it goes from the brainstem to a whole bunch of places. So I'm not going to give the complete list, but it innervates or it communicates with musculature in the face, musculature of the voice. So it like innervates the hard palate and the larynx and the tongue. And then it keeps wandering downward, the heart, the lungs, the respiratory diaphragm, and then all of your abdominal organs and abdominal viscera. So all of those parts of the body and more are all interconnected through their connection on the vagus nerve. And the job of the vagus nerve is to communicate from the brain to those body parts, about 20%, and 80% communicate those body parts up to the brain to
That's the
tell
part
us
that always
whether.
gets me.
I know, it's so cool. And that its job is to shift us or give us the possibility of shifting from fight or flight, the sympathetic nervous system, into rest and digest, the parasympathetic nervous system. So it's this communication superhighway of safety. It's basically the brain is kind of asking all of those parts of the body, facial expression, tone of voice, heart rate, lungs, respiratory diaphragm movement, your guts, everything. It's like, hey, how are you doing? And they're like, we're doing okay. Or they're like, we are not doing great. We're like, okay. So there's this communication, this beautiful communication happening throughout the body via the vagus nerve, constantly shifting us more towards like alert. Do I need to be prepared for action? And are we moving? What's happening? Or like, oh no, we can kind of chill. We can digest things right now. We can remember things right now. We can do some other things because we're not on alert.
Mm.
And so for a singer, I mean, when I learned this, it was like, oh my God, why? Like, how is this not page one of every pedagogy textbook? Because all of those parts of the body that I just mentioned are all the singer parts, right?
Completely.
Facial nerves for facial expression, for articulation and resonance of the voice, obviously all of the musculature and fascia of the vocal tract inside the mouth and throat, the larynx, and then all of the muscles of respiration. So it's like okay, this is really, really
This
important.
is very relevant to what you
Yeah,
do.
exactly. But it's relevant for everybody because
Absolutely.
everyone is toggling not so much back and forth between fight or flight, because they really are kind of a blended. They're more on a dimmer than they are like
Mm-hmm.
an on-off light switch. We
Mm-hmm.
can be very much in fight or flight or freeze and know it, but most of us are kind of living somewhere in the middle most of the time. We're
On
kind
a
of in this,
continuum.
yeah, on this continuum, this kind of, if you're looking at your phone and you're getting a lot of stimulus or you're driving, there's like this low grade fight or flight because we're preparing for the
Yeah.
possibility that we need to respond. Only when we're like the most relaxed do we really shift towards the parasympathetic. And so there are all these different things that we can do by interacting with those different parts that are interconnected on the vagus nerve to help us learn to shift more towards the parasympathetic. And so
Which
these
is
can
good
be
to
movement.
know.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's something that we do have some agency over. And also, it's not something we can completely control. So,
Yeah.
I think sometimes people read these articles or do videos, it's like, this will immediately calm you down if you do X, Y, and Z. And that really overpromises and sometimes
Mm-hmm.
under delivers and makes us
Mm-hmm.
feel worse. So it's really important to know that all of this is a maybe.
Yeah.
There's the possibility that we can move towards a certain experience, but not to have firm, rigid expectations.
Right, because we're not like these machines where you can
No,
just flip a switch and it's
no,
like, now I've got it how I want it. We're more
exactly.
complex than that, but it is still really useful to have some of these tools for
Mhm.
when we know that we're overreacting or we're feeling anxious or we're
Yeah.
needing to go to sleep or, something like that, or we're needing to be with someone and
Mhm.
who's in distress, so we can actually have some sense of tuning into our vagal tone and maybe regulating or at least influencing it.
Yeah.
I kind of like to
Yeah.
say influencing more than
Love.
regulate because like you said, we don't have complete control.
Yeah, you can't regulate it. It's not amenable to regulation. I mean, it is to a degree, but yeah, I mean, influencing it in all the ways that we try to influence our experience throughout our life, right?
Yeah.
There are all kinds of different things that we might do to shift conditions, anticipating that it might have a certain outcome, and often it does, and sometimes it doesn't. And so then, we want to expand our toolbox of different things that we have available to us to help us shift the state of our body, the state of our mind, if and when it's appropriate to do so, and then also building the capacity to be with what is actually happening right now, and
Yes.
not necessarily covering things over or trying to change or air quotes fix them, including in singing and expressive artistry. Which, as we were saying with classical music, where there's this sometimes very like rigid definition of what an air quotes good or air quotes
Hmm.
acceptable sound is, right? And the pursuit of that can be really, really intense. And so sometimes being with what's coming up with that and not trying to cover that over or like fix or change it, and just acknowledging like this is hard, or I've hit a roadblock, or I'm not making the sound that I think I'm supposed to make or that I want to make, and that's challenging for me. And then of course in all of life, we come up against these circumstances that are challenging. And so sometimes I think about this a lot with meditation too. If something's coming up that's difficult in meditation, you have a choice, right? The choice is, do I want to be with this? Is it
Hmm.
skillful for me to kind of investigate what's going on and really feel this? Or does it make sense for me to kind of shift away from what is difficult, whether it's a thought or a physical sensation? Is it more skillful for me to take a break if I'm really
Hmm.
overwhelmed with what's coming up? Or is this something I can be with? And both choices are excellent. It's just a matter in the moment of deciding what is the kindest and most skillful way to proceed. Um, and so that's what I think all these
Yeah.
practices, embodiment practices, are about, is helping us be present with what's happening right now, helping us to decide when we want to make a change or when we want to be with what's happening right now, and then giving us tools to make those shifts if and when it's appropriate or possible.
I love that. And, these are some of the key teachings of mindfulness, really. And
Yeah.
they're basic, but they apply to every realm of what we do, how we
Yep.
go about our day and what we do for work, or in your case, being a performer and interacting with other musicians, or,
Mm-hmm.
conductors who want to tell you how to sing and,
Yes. And then
all of
doing it
that.
with a mask on,
Oh my
which is a
gosh.
whole other thing right now.
I can't even
Yeah.
imagine.
Yeah. Life is a lot.
It's a lot.
Life is a lot.
So it's, yeah, like you said, it's about building capacity to be with what is and to be
Hmm.
present in our lives and to be, active, aware participants in that life. And
Yeah.
yeah. So, on the vagus nerve, what are some of the ways that we know that we can affect the tone of the vagus nerve?
Right. Such a good question. So it's really about interacting, like I said, with the different parts of the body that are along this vagus tract. So if we work kind of from the work from the bottom up. So if we think about the innervation or the connection of the abdominal viscera and the respiratory diaphragm, which is the deep breathing muscle that sits, basically separates the thoracic cavity with your heart and lungs from your abdomen that has all of your other major organs, right? So if we think about that area of the body, any kind of movement or stimulation, it could be touch, we'll go more into myofascial release, but it could be abdominal massage, very gentle, but also movement. So side bending, twisting, breath practices that move the diaphragm, that move the abdominals, that move the organs behind the abdominal wall. So any of that, all of that can stimulate that area of the body. But we have to remember that because we're working with the nervous system, this is all about safety cues.
Mm.
And so any interaction that we're trying to create with these different parts of the body needs to be, as much as possible, feeling safe to us.
Mm-hmm.
So ways that we can make ourselves feel more safe is being in an environment in which we feel comfortable and safe, being on our own or with teachers who are kind and nurturing and respectful and ones with whom we have trust. Making sure things like temperature feel good, and most importantly, intensity feels
Mm-hmm.
appropriate. And sometimes we'll get into this with myofascial release. Sometimes we can have intense sensations that may not necessarily feel good, but they feel productive and we
Mm-hmm.
feel safe while we're doing it. And so
Right.
those things can contribute to that vagal activation that shifts us to the parasympathetic. So
Right.
also, I'll go to chanting last because that kind of
Yeah,
uses
so
them
we got
all.
like breath and
Yeah,
affecting
so
the
breath,
abdominal viscera
exactly.
and
And
what
also
else?
heart and lungs. So if
Heart
we're
and
doing
lungs.
any kind of movement practice that is linked with breath or just breathing practices on their own, the entire torso moves with the breath, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we can also do self-massage, myofascial release, or receive touch on those areas of the body. And all of that can be stimulating for those vagus fibers. And then if we move upward into like the throat and the face, toning, making sound has the potential to be down-regulating to the nervous system. So that's going to integrate the mouth, the throat, all those innervation points with the heart, the lungs, the diaphragm, the abdominal viscera. All of that's interconnected. So the quality of someone's voice can often be calming for us. So
Mm.
listening to music that has tones, especially vocal tones, that sound soothing, that sound comforting, that sound interesting, that you can kind of sympathetically feel, and
Hmm.
then also creating those tones yourself. So that could be like humming or chanting or singing your favorite music or whatever it is. That's all going to excite and kind of light up all of those areas in the face and in the throat that are innervated on the vagus. And then up at the tippy top, a lot of facial muscles are on this vagus tract. And so this is where facial expression is something that can really help us to shift. Like when, you smile at someone and they smile back at you and you feel either uplifted or you feel calmed or something, that's your vagus nerve, right? That's you
Mm.
recognizing safety and protection in another, or delight, and the body going like, oh, we're good. This is good. This interaction is safe and is comfortable and is pleasurable.
Yeah,
Right.
and
So it's
some
kind
of
of
it
like
is
working.
it's relational. It's in
It
connection with
absolutely
others.
is. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
it's so
that's why the
cool.
vocal tone thing and the facial expression, and
Hmm.
even actually observing the way other people are in their own bodies. If you're watching a body that is breathing easily, that feels supple, that feels spacious, calm, all the things that would indicate that that person is not bracing or preparing for activity, then
Hmm.
often we go like, oh, okay, if this person seems to be safe in their body, maybe I can too. And so there is this amazing reciprocal relationship with the vagus
Mm-hmm.
nerve. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it all makes so much sense. And it's like
Yeah.
you can see why we click with certain yoga teachers or
Totally.
meditation teachers because
Yeah.
of their voice and their presence and
Yeah.
kind of the unconscious connection and what that does for us and how
Yeah.
nurturing that can be. But it also makes sense, that chanting is part of the yoga tradition, and
Mhm.
and so is breath work and movement, and all of these things are already there in the yoga practice that can
Yes.
help us to regulate and to stimulate the vagus nerve. So
Right. These are
so
things
cool.
that we have known for thousands of years to be healing, to be comforting, to be soothing, to help us to inquire. Like having this foundation of safety is what allows us to potentially go in and observe and respond to more challenging physical
Hmm.
sensations or thoughts or emotions, right? That's how we build that capacity, is this sort of titration of like, overall, I feel reasonably, hopefully, not always, but reasonably safe in my environment. And that's going to give me the space to then maybe push those boundaries a little bit, or just simply enjoy feeling good, because we don't always have to be picking and learning
Yeah.
and growing and going deeper. Sometimes we can just like feel great. I have to say, since we're talking about some of this in the context of singing and also playing the flute, I think that there's this really interesting paradox with, if you read any article about strengthening vagal tone or activating the vagus nerve, it'll say like chanting, singing, da da da. For some of us, my hand is up. Singing is an upregulating experience. Like,
Oh
singing
yeah.
is not the thing that I am personally going to do to calm me down
You have
or
too
shift
much
me.
going on with singing
Yeah,
in your
exactly. I
mind.
mean, singing is
Yeah.
my profession. Singing is my identity. I have had a
Uh-huh.
lot of really, really, really challenging experiences in performance with stage anxiety and
Hmm.
disappointment and shame and a lot of stuff that, like, that's not my go-to place for
Yeah.
me. So I'm not the kind of person who's going to be going to like a bhakti class and chanting and that is not the place where I am going to feel like I'm getting that shift, if that's my intention. I will
Yeah.
find other ways to connect to my body and to stimulate the vagus nerve. And then that, for me, in my experience, and I know for many singers I've worked with, has translated over into singing. So now singing actually sometimes has the potential to be calming for me now, which was not the case for most of my life. But there is this interesting paradox here. And same with breath work. Many meditative techniques or pranayama, different breath techniques that are touted as down regulating.
Hmm.
Typically, the belief is that the exhalation form of the breath is more the parasympathetic response. The deep exhalation is more calming. The inhalation is more activating. But if you are someone who has ever struggled in any way with breathing, maybe you had issues in water, maybe you have asthma, maybe you have been on stage and felt very depleted of breath and very concerned about the music you were going to make, that feeling of deep exhalation may not be calming. It depends on what the associations are. And so
Totally.
that's where, like, understanding, like, yes, these are some of the physiological possibilities of these practices, but also what's really happening for me.
Yeah.
What am I bringing to these practices, and how do I need to be kind to myself and tailor them to acknowledge my own history so I find something that really works for me? I
Yeah,
think
it's
there are,
always like, how does this suggestion apply to me? And
yeah,
working with a teacher can be so helpful in
yes.
figuring that out. But
Hmm.
it's really true. Like, as another example, because I played flute for so many years, the breath was a very like it's a huge focus of playing a wind instrument
Yeah,
like it is with
yeah.
singing, and it's a lot of taking very quick inhales and then extending your exhale for a very long amount of time with very
Mhm.
precise little tweaks and adjustments to it as you're making music. And
And a lot of expectation
oh yeah,
about what that breath is going to do and what we need to be able to do to sustain or
exactly.
manage our breath to make a particular
Got
sound.
to get to the end
Um,
of that phrase, and you can't take a breath in the wrong place, and it becomes a tool more than a life-giving bodily
right.
function. It's become a tool of your work. And
Yeah.
so when I first started to do mindfulness meditation, and it was like, don't control the breath, just be with the breath. Oh my gosh, that was so
Yeah.
hard for me.
Isn't it strange? Yeah, to just observe the rhythm of the breath right now
Mm-hmm.
without trying to manipulate it or change it, without having any expectation. I think for singers, for wind players, brass players, I think for everybody, breath focused meditation has a great potential.
Mm-hmm.
It's not right for every single person, but in general, it's a helpful anchor because it's accessible for most of us. We're all breathing, right? And for many people, it's a pretty neutral place to rest the attention.
Mm-hmm.
But for some people, it's not a neutral place. And again, you come to that crossroads of like, this isn't, breathing is not neutral for me because again, like I have asthma, or I am a flute player, or I, whatever
Mm-hmm.
it is. So is it a helpful, not neutral? Like, do I want to go in and notice what kinds of thoughts and feelings and physical reactions come up as I look at my breath and kind of remove it from the context that I'm used to thinking about it in? Or it's like, no, this is not serving my goals for my practice right now. So I'm instead going to
Exactly.
shift my anchor to something else.
Yeah, there have been times when I did use breath as my primary anchor, and other
Mm-hmm.
times where I've spent like months, if not years, doing body scans because
Yeah,
it was
yeah,
more. It had the better effect in my practice of
right,
deepening the practice without distracting me
right.
with the challenges of the breath. So,
Mm-hmm.
so this is really, I think a good thing to bring in because sometimes we just hear instructions and they don't always come with enough nuance for everyone to know that you can make the practice your own. All of these yoga and meditation practices, they're meant to be applied in these individual ways.
Yes. Capital YES, period, exclamation point. Yeah. And I mean, of course, like in a class, you don't necessarily have the luxury of going into all the nuance of all the
Hmm.
ways in which the practice, might be challenging or might be nourishing for different people in their different lives. But just stating at the outset, like, this is
Yeah.
your practice and you are empowered to adjust it and change it or leave it or come back to it, like as you see fit in the
Yeah.
moment. And for me, in my role, if I am leading a class or if I am facilitating someone in a voice lesson or something like that, it's making sure that there's real clarity about the fact that this is for you,
Mm.
and my job is to help facilitate the experience that you want. So I might offer suggestions based on what I think might be helpful, and then it's that dialogue is so incredibly important about how to refine the approach so that it's the most effective for each individual person because everyone is so different.
I love that. That's amazing.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I
Student
felt
led,
like my
student led.
lessons were for me. I mean, who else would they have been for? But now it's interesting looking back on
Oh, yes. I
it.
know.
Well, I want to go a little more into the myofascial release
Yay.
because, not only is that a way of stimulating the vagus nerve to help us to influence our nervous system, but it's also, beneficial in many other ways. So,
Yes.
can you tell us a little bit about, if people aren't familiar with the term myofascial release, what that is, and what are some of the ways that it's helpful?
Yeah, totally. So myofascial release, fascia, which is sort of having a moment right now, like fascia is a trending topic, hashtag fascia, FACSCIA. I haven't tried to spell that without looking at it before. Um, so fascia is basically the connective tissue that envelops every single muscle fiber in your body, every bone, every organ. Everything is encapsulated in layers of fascia. And so this is like a semi-gruesome image, but not really, I hope. If we were to take away all of your muscle fibers and your eyes and your eyelashes and your organs and everything and left your fascia, we would still have like 3D scaffolding of your form. But we would still see the form of your body because it's really what interconnects every fiber of your being, literally.
Hmm.
So the term myofascia is sort of a combination of myo referring to muscle and fascia. So myofascial release is essentially any kind of stimulation technique, massage or self-massage technique that is stimulating muscle and fascia. And so the most kind of common myofascial release that people often know is foam rolling.
Yeah.
And then I say that and then people are like, tune out because they've foam rolled before and it was really uncomfortable and they're like, not for me, right? Yes. So unfortunately that's often many people's like entry point into myofascial release. Another entry point is like, say someone you love, came behind you and you had a really difficult day and they put their hands on the tops of your shoulders and they give you a little shoulder massage. You got this, champ. That's also myofascial release. That's it. And that's more the expression of myofascial release that has the potential to downregulate the nervous system. Mm-hmm. So all of your muscle fibers, everything has all of these mechanoreceptors that are responding to the environment. And so touching different parts of the body with, gentle, squishy therapy balls or hands or a towel or a foam roller potentially, all of that stimulates the muscle and the fascia and stimulates sensation. So the benefits of experiencing that type of sensation are, first of all, that sometimes that touch can be very soothing. It can be calming. That alone, combined especially with like slower movement, slower breathing, has great potential for downregulation. So as long as we're communicating, again, safety to the body through that touch, and I'll get into that a little bit more in a moment, it has the potential for downregulating the nervous system. The actual fascia itself and the muscles have all kinds of different fluids. Fascia is mostly elastin and collagen, so it's like very, very strong, but also has a stretchy aspect to it. Mm-hmm. So by doing myofascial release, we can increase what's referred to as slide and glide of muscle fibers and connective tissue. This is why when people do myofascial release, often the body feels like more elastic, more spacious. It feels easier to move. Muscles feel more relaxed sometimes. So that's kind of the physiological or anatomical benefit. And then one of the other great benefits is it increases proprioception. So proprioception is our sense of where we are in space, where our body is in space. And interoception is our sense of what's going on internally, sensations we're having inside the body, intero, and then proprioception where we are in space. So by doing these types of self-massage techniques or receiving a massage, the body is just much more alive and awake. We often feel sensation in parts of the body that we don't typically feel, and that helps us relate more readily to our environment, to refine the way that we move. If we're a musician and we're trying to use our body as a musical instrument, it can be a really helpful way to refine that physical coordination and feel good while we're doing it.
Yeah,
so that's kind of my baseline.
Much good stuff.
Yeah.
So much good stuff, like it can just plain feel good and release stress and tension from our muscles. And on that basic level, it's totally worthwhile. But, like, as you mentioned, the fascia is filled with these receptors that are part of our nervous system. And so it has that communication with us on a really deep level. It's so lovely to go get a massage or have someone who's a myofascial release body worker work on you. So awesome. But one thing I love about self-massage is that you get to be an active participant in the movement. So I think that practice really does more to deepen your proprioception and interoception and embodiment because you are involved. You're directing it based on what you're feeling.
Yeah, so I totally agree.
That's so valuable.
Both and. It's definitely a both and situation. But the nice thing with self-myofascial release is that you can do 5 minutes of it. You can target a specific body part. And also, it's if you're using your hands or a towel that you have, or you're using like a clean rubber glove or something like that, there are lots of different DIY tools, then it's free, and this is something you don't have to spend any money on. And the myofascial tools that are available for purchase, the ones that I really love, are not very expensive.
It's accessible, and you can get up in the middle of the night and do it where, you can't get your massage therapist to work on you
on call at 3 a.m, or you can bring it on retreat, like we were emailing about.
Exactly.
Yeah, you can bring it on retreat. You can do, it's portable. And then the most important thing that you were alluding to is it's really empowering. It allows you to deepen this relationship with your own body. You're kind of following that intuition of like, where do I want to go next? Or like, oh, I think the ball would feel better if it was just like a teeny bit to the left, like refining that sense of intuition about what our body wants and needs, and then learning to honor that and build trust in knowing what our body wants and needs is such a beautiful benefit of this practice.
I think it's such a cool tool for discovering things about the body. Like there's been so many times where I rolled on a part of the body and I'm like, wow, I didn't know that this tension was here or this knot was here or whatever.
Right.
And you also feel some of the connections between anatomical structures that you might not have been so aware of otherwise. So it's so educational.
Definitely. The interconnectedness, approaching your body from the fascia perspective is, I think, really, really important, because historically the way that people have thought about body parts is in this very segmented way, a surgical way. But you're not separate parts. Everything is interconnected. A perfect example of this, especially for anyone who is a singer or plays a wind instrument, is that your psoas hip flexor, which is a muscle that helps you like bring your knee towards your chest. If you're sitting in a chair, your hip is flexed, right, at the groin. So the psoas hip flexor connects to the upper inner thigh, and then it weaves its way behind your abdominals, behind your abdominal organs, and it connects to your lumbar spine at the same level as your diaphragm.
Right.
So your legs are connected to your breath, not just like, you know, in a sort of woo-woo, everything's interconnected way, but like literally actually knitted together. That fascia, the fascia of the psoas is interwoven with the fascia of the diaphragm. Again, something not on the first page of a vocal pedagogy textbook, but really important. And those kinds of things, learning them, it was like, oh, this is why when we move our hips, when we move our legs, when we come into different physical postures, it changes the sound of the voice or the way someone experiences their singing. Well, of course it does, because these things are all interconnected. And so movement practices, myofascial release, and you don't have to do like a ton of anatomical education. You don't have to get a kinesiology degree, but just knowing, you know, getting some information about how these parts are interconnected can be really illuminating around your own patterning. It's really amazing.
It's so amazing. And so we've kind of started to hint at what some of the tools are, but what are your favorite self-massage tools? What are there, and are there any kind of like tools out there that you would say stay away from?
Yeah. So, I mean, for things that someone could do today, your hands are fantastic. You can simply, if you are willing, if you are comfortable, you know, put your hands on different parts of your body and massage, feel, touch, you know, put your hand on your shoulder, press down gently enough that you have a little bit of traction and just kind of wiggle, like feel the skin move. Notice, like, if I have my hand on the top of my shoulder and I'm wiggling, what do I feel on the back? What does it do with my breath? You know, just how these parts are interconnected, and you can massage in any way that feels good. For liberating the breath, so doing myofascial release for the pelvic floor, if that feels safe and appropriate, for the abdomen, for the ribs, the intercostal muscles between the ribs and the chest. I love working with a towel. So you can kind of roll up a towel and then you can unroll it as much as you need to, because those areas can be surprisingly tender.
Oh, yeah.
You wouldn't think like, oh, it's just a towel on my abdomen, I'm going to lay down on it. Oof. It can be a lot. And it's really illuminating about the ways that we hold our body, the ways for many of us certain emotions, memories, experiences, thought patterns are held in different areas of the body. So, you know, being very, very, very kind and respectful when we do those practices, but a towel is a really good one for that.
I love that for like going up the side ribs, like a rolled towel or blanket. And man, are there some little spots in there? There's some serious little volcanoes in those rib muscles that.
Yes. I think about these as places sometimes that are just so eager and excited to talk to us. They're like, I've been wanting to talk to you about this.
I've been
Thank
waiting
you.
40 years for you to say hello.
Thank you for inviting a conversation. And I have a lot to say. And you might not be ready to receive everything that your abdomen has to say, you know, or your ribs or your, you know, chest. I did one of my trainings that I did with Jill Miller, who's a wonderful teacher and creator of some tools that I'll talk about in just a moment. She has a program called Breath and Bliss Immersion that's a lot about myofascial release and breath work and extended shavasana. She has a specific way she likes to teach shavasana. And I did this immersion with her. Usually it's 3 or 4 days, but this one happened to be 5 days. And it was a lot. And we did a lot on the chest. And I just had so much stuff kind of stored in that area that I chose to take a lot of breaks. I was like, we're pushing on this button too much. And this has become like my crying button. And I need to stop pushing on this button. Yeah, but that is a big part of it, is recognizing like these things are coming up. Again, I'm at this point. Do I want to be with this? Is it more kind, compassionate, skillful for me to take a break? And I got a lot of opportunities to practice that choice. And I was grateful for that. So yeah, rolled up towel, hands, fantastic for DIY. The tools that I use the most, as far as things that you can purchase, are continuing with the breath work. In lieu of a towel, I love the Gorgeous ball, which is created by Jill Miller's program Yoga Tune-Up. It's about $15, and it's an inflatable ball with a slightly tacky texture. So if you have like a Pilates ball, which is basically the size of a kickball, but it's like a much thinner material. So it's inflatable, it's squishy. You can control how much you inflate it. So if you're using it for your abdomen or your chest, somewhere that you want less sensation, you can deflate it a little bit. If you're using it on your back or somewhere that feels a little less sensational, it might be rolled up all the way. So I really love the Gorgeous ball for breath work. I love it for areas of the body, that want really gentle touch. So if you're doing pelvic floor work, if you're doing psoas, working into the groin crease, abdomen, ribs, chest, those areas. Or if you, like, say you've had back issues and you're trying to communicate safety and soothing, this is a really good tool for that. So it's kind of like, in terms of intensity, it's like a palm of a hand touching your body, right? So the other tools that I use the most are what are called Yoga Tune-Up balls. You can also buy Pinky balls, and they are basically
they're rubber.
They're rubber. Yeah, I was thinking about the size. They're like lacrosse ball sized, but they are not lacrosse balls. We'll get to that in a moment. Yes. So they have kind of a rubberized texture. They feel kind of like an eraser. My big thing with myofascial tools is you need to be able to squish them with your hand. They should have some give to them, some pliability, and also a texture that is going to create a little bit of traction on the skin. You have multiple layers of fascia. The superficial layer of fascia is right underneath your skin. And so that responds to a little bit of traction. So for that reason, a tennis ball has the pliability. It's not too firm, but it also is soft.
It's that weird fuzzy texture too.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not going to get that traction on the skin. So it's not quite optimal, but it is fine if that's what you have and you kind of want to explore. If it feels good to you, awesome. Not going to yuck your yum on the tennis ball. Lacrosse balls, however, and who has like lacrosse balls?
I don't have any laying
around.
Don't know. That has not
people
been
I know
a thing
whose
for me.
kids play lacrosse apparently, but that's like often the go-to of like, oh yeah, I put a lacrosse ball right in the center of my glute.
Wooden, is it wood? Like it's a really hard ball.
It's rubber too. It's plastic, but it's very, very stiff. It has no pliability at all. So going back to the idea of safety, communicating safety to the body, sometimes when we do myofascial release, it is not necessarily comfortable. But we want to be able to breathe easily. We want to be able to feel like we can yield into the sensation and that we can be with it.
There's a fine line there.
It is, right. And the way that you'll find out where that line is by transgressing it. Hopefully not too hard. Yeah. But yeah, we figure this out through our practice. But if what we're looking for is, like I said, a sense of yielding, a sense of expansion, being interested in the sensation. If you feel your body bracing or you're wincing, or you feel your body tighten and stiffen against the touch, we want to breathe a little bit and see if maybe that was just an initial response and like, okay, I'm cool, I can relax into this. If you can't, then we want to change the stimulus, right? So if you were working with like a yoga tune-up ball or a pinky ball, you could cover it up with a towel to diffuse its intensity. You might change the placement. You might switch over to a gorgeous ball or your hands or something that is more gentle. But really just always kind of, the whole point of this practice is to be aware of what's going on and to respond kindly and skillfully. And it is a practice. Like we learn how to do it over time. So to that end, as far as tools that I would not recommend is basically anything that would cause that kind of bracing response. So balls that are really hard. I've seen people like, leaning up against a door jamb and kind of trying to dig out tension in their shoulders and stuff like that.
Like a bear on a tree.
Exactly. And it can feel really satisfying and beneficial in the moment. And then you just want to be interested in what happens later in the day or the next day. Yeah. So if the next day or later you're feeling like, really open and you feel more elastic and things feel good, then fine. If the next day though you feel like stiffer, or you feel stiffer immediately afterward, that's an indicator that it was probably more than was beneficial. It probably caused more of a bracing response than a yielding.
Should you ever feel sore the next day? What do you think?
So I think, you might sometimes, often there have been all these different theories about what causes what we experience as like delayed onset muscle soreness after exercise. And one of the current theories about that is it actually is inflammation of the fascia, and it's the result of moving in a new way. Yeah. So if you do the same kind of exercise modality, you might feel a lot of that delayed onset muscle soreness the first couple times you do it, and then you progressively don't feel that as much. It's not because the exercise is less effective. It's just because your fascia knows how to move in that plane now. Yeah, it's not novel. Exactly. So soreness the day after doing myofascial work, certainly. Or after deep tissue massage. Yeah. Also, the deeper you're going. So I was mentioning the gorgeous ball is like the palm of a hand. These little smaller kind of tennis ball size therapy balls are more like a thumb. Yeah. So they're going into deeper layers of fascia. And so you might end up with a little bit of soreness the next day. Monitor that. And again, I think soreness versus stiffness is an interesting consideration point. If I feel a little bit sore, but overall that part of the body feels pretty pliable and free or feels like pretty normal, then I don't think I've transgressed that boundary.
And soreness is different from feeling like I'm almost bruised here.
Right. And sometimes depending on your body, some people might have a little bit of bruising, and that's something I've been asked about before. So I would say, monitor it and see how, like anything, how it shows up in your life. Anything that is causing soreness or bruising, my instinct is like back way off. Less is more. Life is long, hopefully. You're going to have many, many opportunities to do this type of practice. And the idea that we would change something that is habitual in our body in like 1 5-minute protocol is pretty unrealistic, right? Yeah. So going for just something that is interesting, comfortable-ish for the most part, and then letting it unfold from there, being patient with the process instead of trying to do a lot all at once will help to prevent going too far. But my inclination, I'm like a more is more person. And I'm always going to kind of like go for more. I've learned that about myself, and I don't do that as much as I used to, but more is not better. More is just more. Yeah. And so sometimes I think, especially with myofascial release, we get really excited about the possibilities, and then we do it for a long time and we do the whole body. And I would recommend doing a little bit less and trusting that it has this beautiful unfolding over time.
Kind of look at the global effect of, I feel more open, I feel more at ease, I feel like a little more freedom of movement or freedom of breath, and I
feel proud that I took some time to do something nurturing and kind to myself, that I took, hopefully put the phone down while I was doing it. And I took 5, 10, 20 minutes to feel my feet, to care for my feet, to care for my shoulders, to care for my abdomen, to be present with what's coming up, especially if it wasn't totally comfortable.
Which is such a different attitude than the, gotta do more, gotta fix it. Because, like, I think that's where people want to go for those, like, really harder balls sometimes. Or, like,
Mhm.
have you seen those ones that are, like, spiky? They look so
Yeah.
like torture
Yeah. So something
devices. Or, like,
totally. So some things that have that kind of texture are actually interesting and can be really useful for sort of teasing into layers of fascia. But again, it's just about just
mm,
being really kind to yourself and observing how they make you feel. Like I have well, I'll talk about foam rollers in a second, but I have one of the foam rollers. I would never recommend somebody buy this one, but it's the one that looks like kind of tire treads. It has like those
mhm.
deep kind of square grooves. I actually use it. I really love it for my quads. I lay on it really lightly and I just shift my body side to side.
Mhm.
So it's just this very, very gentle kind of teasing. Am I going to put my full body weight on it and roll forward and backward? Absolutely not. But
Yeah.
that's what I think people do with that tool, which is why I don't recommend
It'd be
it.
like getting
But
run
yeah,
over by a tire.
right, exactly. But these tools that have texture can be really fantastic and offer really interesting novel sensation. It's just about
How
how are we
you
interacting with them.
got it.
And remembering, like you just said, the that instinct to use like the harder tool, more is more, like air quotes, fix, this part of the body. That's a very upregulated, action-oriented attitude, which is fine. Like there's a great place for like doing and acting and wanting to accomplish something. But if our intention with myofascial is partially to shift into rest and digest, then that idea of like more, achieve, do, that is sort of antithetical to that state of the nervous system, which is much more about receiving sensation, curiosity, slowing down. Um,
Totally.
so I think it's important, I believe, with myofascial release to always come at it from how is this influencing my nervous system versus thinking just about like the anatomical parts.
Yeah, because we're not just muscles and bones and tissues. We are wired with this nervous system, and
Yeah.
you
And
cannot
they're talking
separate
to
the
each
two.
other. Yes, they're talking to each other.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. So with
Exactly.
foam rollers, one thing I would say, I like a foam roller for larger areas of the body that we're trying to stimulate more efficiently.
Hmm.
So like quadriceps, hamstrings, glutes, those are areas of the body where if you were using yoga tune-up balls, it takes a really long time to like get
Hmm.
all of that territory.
It's just
So it's
hard to,
nice.
like, position yourself on the floor to roll your hamstrings
Yes.
on a ball.
Yeah. With hamstrings, you have to do it seated because you don't want to like impinge the sciatic nerve. And there's all kinds of like different things
Hmm.
there. So I like the foam roller for that. I'm a runner still, and just a few swipes, not spending a lot of time on my quadriceps, but just enough that I'm telling them like, we're okay. I honor you. Thank you for your service. And give you a little bit of soothing so that you don't like totally stiffen up and freak out. I would recommend if you're getting a foam roller that you get one that says like soft or medium density in the description and does not have a PVC core. So that PVC pipe core is going to be really, really stiff. And we want something that as much as possible has
Mm.
some yield and give to it. The melt method foam roller is really squishy. That's a cool one that you can use on a lot of different parts of the body. Most of your body is not going to be super amenable to a foam roller. So like it's really primarily for legs. And also
Mhm.
it can be a cool prop. You can use it to prop you up and doing other things. But as far as actually stimulating the fascia,
Yeah.
it's a good workhorse for the legs. And I would recommend one that just has a little bit of texture to it, but doesn't necessarily have like spikes or grooves. Keep it simple.
It doesn't look like a torture device.
Correct. We're not. That's
Well,
not the
I
vibe.
want to just kind of talk a little bit before we wrap up about
Yeah.
mindfulness and embodiment.
Mm,
And,
yeah.
you call your work embodied singer. And
Mhm.
I know you just got back from meditation retreat at
I
Spirit Rock, which is a
did.
place that I
Yeah.
love. And
Oh,
I
it's the
always
best.
take massage balls with me on meditation retreat
Nice.
because it's so hard to sit for that amount of sitting.
Can I say something interesting that I
Yes.
learned this time? So when one sits retreat, and even if you don't sit retreat, it is very, very common to feel sensations of physical discomfort, even if you have found a really great supportive posture that when you start, you feel comfortable and you have, cushions under your knees and under your pelvis and all that stuff. Eventually the body starts to complain. It's just the body, just like the mind, is designed to move. And so if it stays in one place, it's going to start talking to you about how it would like to move somewhere else, right? So what I see a lot, and I have the instinct to do this too, and I still do, is on retreat, when you're starting to experience discomfort in the hips, in the knees, in the shoulders, all these different places, I see a lot of people stretching, right? Mm-hmm. So we feel like tightness in our muscles and we're like, it's tight, it must need to get stretched out. But what we know is that a lot of times when we feel that kind of signal of the body going like, I'm not very comfortable, and it feels like maybe tightness, often that tightness is trying to stabilize a part of the body that is getting overstretched. So if we think about if we're meditating in a cross-legged position and we start to feel some aching in our hips, the hips are getting stretched in that cross-legged position. And then we're sitting there for a long time. And always thinking back about the nervous system and safety, the body may be communicating to you like, I feel unstable in this position. And so I'm going to talk to you and ask you to bring me into a position that feels more stable, safer, et cetera. So there's a place for stretching when we feel that kind of discomfort, but also knowing exercises that make that part of the body feel engaged and stable and supportive is also really important. So I learned this time on retreat, every morning before I went for our first period of meditation, I did some squats, I did some lunges, I did some single-legged lunges, I activated glutes, hamstrings, quads, and I did a little bit of shoulder and back muscle activation. And I felt better on this retreat than I ever have. So it's a combination of strengthening and lengthening, and knowing that if your body is saying like, pay attention to me, it may not just need to get longer. Totally. It may actually need to be engaged and activated. So
thank you for that. That's amazing advice. And that rings true for me.
It really helped me a lot.
Along with my tune-up balls, I always bring a resistance band. And so
yes, yeah,
that's
exactly.
Like what you do when you have the little breaks in between, right. Sometimes during the walking meditation, you go off and do a little bit of body practice to help take care of yourself, because
absolutely,
there's nothing like meditation retreat to bring up all the little achy places in the body that you just haven't been paying attention to when you've been running around in your normal life, and B, you're just kind of sitting still a lot. So
yeah, I mean, you're doing like 3 primary movements. You're either sitting, you're walking very slowly, or you're sleeping.
Yeah.
And there you might get a little other plane of movement in your yogi job while you're cleaning a shower, you're chopping carrots or something like that. But mostly, it's a very, very limited repertoire of movements.
Yeah.
So yes.
So you learn how to like mix some of that in for yourself. Hopefully, I don't know if everyone does, but some of us do who are kind of body nerd type people and who love movement practice. So they work really well together. I think it's important to combine. And well, so I have loved this conversation so much, and
yay, me too.
I want to ask if there's anything else you want to add to it, anything else you want to say about self-massage or embodiment, or
I mean, I can talk about all this stuff forever, but I think one question that I think that you wanted to ask, and I'll answer it, is like, what does embodiment, what is it to be embodied? What does that even mean? And I think that, the definition is going to be different for every single person who engages with that question, and it will evolve over time in the most interesting ways. But to me, it's just simply an awareness and a presence of what is happening right now, what's happening in my body, what's happening in my emotional intelligence, what's happening in my mind, how are those things in dialogue with one another, and then how is that informing the way that I show up in my life? How is that informing the choices that I make, how I respond in relationship, how I respond to challenge, what I want, and checking in always with all that incredible intelligence that is the intelligence of the physical body, of our emotional lives, as well as, of course, our intellect, and the relationship and the dialogue between those different aspects.
It's so rich, it's a kind of presence, and that makes it sound so simple, but it's like the way you're describing it, it is so rich. That dialogue.
Simple, not easy.
Simple, not easy.
Like all these practices, simple,
Yeah.
not easy.
Well, because we have so much conditioning and environment around us that discourages us from being in the body and from being present. And
Yeah.
so we're going against the grain of that when we do these
Yeah.
practices.
And a lot of reasons why it may not feel comfortable or
Totally.
feel safe to engage with our emotions or to express them or to engage with our body or to express it or move it or to engage with our mind, right?
Hmm.
And that's part of that unfolding process, is recognizing, where is there aversion? Like, what am I not really wanting to be with? And acknowledging that, and again coming to that choice point of like, okay, do I investigate this, do I stay here, do
Hmm.
I set that aside for another time,
Hmm.
knowing, again, just like with the myofascial release, anything else, hopefully life is long and we have plenty excuse me, of opportunities to ask these questions and get new responses every time.
Yeah, that balance of awareness and kindness.
Yes. Always kindness, always
Always.
kindness. And especially if you have the honor of sharing these types of practices with other people, always leading from that
Yeah.
place of kindness at the foundation, curiosity, and openness to just whatever is arising.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah.
Thank you so
Yay.
much for this
Oh, my
conversation, Shauna. I feel like
pleasure.
I could
Love it.
keep talking to you for a
I know.
long
We'll do
time.
part
We'll
two.
do another one.
Yeah, happy to.
How can people get in touch with you or follow your work? You do really good self massage videos on Instagram, so everyone should
Uh,
at least go find her on there. But how else
Thank
can people
you.
connect with you?
Yeah, so you can connect with me on Instagram at embodied with a D, embodied singer. And I did myofascial May. So if you scroll down, not too far, you'll see like tons and tons of myofascial stuff that I did in May. Lately, my posts have been more philosophical, more oriented around meditation. You're going to see a bunch right now around the metta loving kindness meditation practice,
Love
because
it.
I'm doing a workshop on Sunday, November 21st, that is metta for musicians. So
Oh,
we'll be exploring the metta practice 3 times. The first time it'll be a version of getting comfortable sending metta to ourselves, which is not something everyone's always comfortable with. So we'll kind of enter it there. Then we'll do the more classical practice. If you're not familiar, it involves the silent repetition of phrases like, may you be happy, may you be healthy, safe, peaceful. In the classical practice, you direct those well wishes to different categories of people. So we'll do that practice. And then we will do a version of it where each of those categories is a version of ourselves as a
mm.
musician, as an artist.
Oh, I love
So
that. How
yeah, it's
creative.
really interesting, and I am loving it in my own practice. So we're going to be doing that on November 21st. So there'll be a lot of metta stuff right now. My website, embodiedsinger.com, has my embodied online library of over 100 videos, all made in the first 10 days of quarantine.
What?
That was my stress response to the advent of COVID-19,
Very
was to
productive.
I know, I still am baffled at that response. It's fascinating. But
Hmm.
anyway, produced a prolific amount of video content.
And you contributed
Much
something good to the world. That's good.
Yeah, and it's all free. Like you'll see at the top, it's like there's an opportunity to donate, but I made it free for the air quotes the duration of COVID-19,
Which
which
is
who knew?
apparently
Now here
forever.
we are, for the rest of our lives. So so here we are 18 months later, and it's still free. But there you can also connect with me about individual lessons. I teach voice, but I also work with individuals around meditation, myofascial release, movement practices,
Cool.
any of these things that might be helpful to you. And there also is my events calendar and all that stuff.
Well, I love it. It's such a wonderful
Yay.
offering, and I really appreciated all the resources you've shared today and all the inspiration. So I know people will get a lot out of this
Oh,
conversation.
I just realized one thing I can't believe I didn't mention. The learning about myofascial release. Tom Myers
Oh yeah.
is the author of a book called Anatomy Trains. My work is from what I learned from Tom Myers and Jill Miller. They
Hmm.
collaborate a lot. So the idea with Anatomy Trains, not to like open up this huge can of worms, but the Anatomy Trains are continuities tracks of fascia that are, we were talking earlier about the unification of the body rather than the segmentation, which is the more like surgical approach. So Tom Meyer's work is about observing these continuities of connective tissue that interconnect areas of the body. And that should be our other conversation. Let's put a pin in this, and we'll do an anatomy trains like talk and kind of go into that. But that work is really, really helpful. Another book I would recommend if you want to start to learn about your body is The Trail Guide to the Body, which is a fantastic anatomy text that gives you suggestions about ways to palpate or touch different parts of the body, to feel them. Really rich anatomical information if you're wanting to start to learn more about what's going on in there.
I love that. And the anatomy trains are really interesting. I've been leading yin yoga teacher training right now. And it's like every time I do that, we're talking about the anatomy trains and the fascia and the Chinese meridians.
Exactly. It's sort of an alternative meridian system.
Totally. The meridian system, this ancient Chinese meridian system, is very much in parallel with these myofascial meridians that body workers and anatomists have kind of fleshed out, for lack of a better term, in our day and age. So it's a very interesting symmetry.
Yeah, absolutely. And just, again, a richer understanding of like how we are interconnected and how discomfort in our shoulders might be about the foot on the other side in our, like, can go really deep into that. But I want to mention those resources because you'll see whenever I mention myofascial release and stuff that his name comes up a lot.
That's so perfect. I'll put these resources in the description so people can find them along with your website and your Insta.
Yay. Thank you so much, Addie. I'm so glad we finally got to talk. And I feel like we could talk.
We could keep going.
Much longer.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for doing this, Shauna.
Yay. And thank you guys for listening. We wish you so well.
So that's today's episode. If you enjoyed this conversation, please share it with a friend or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and help others find us that way. To learn more about my work, the Moved to Meditate class library, live online classes, teacher trainings, and private lessons, go to movedtomeditate.yoga. Thanks so much for listening.